mistreated at one time or another in their life. And so maybe a few people need to, how many people do not feel they've been mistreated? Yeah. Okay, well, good, we have one. I would like to know what planet you're from. But anyway, most of us have had the experience of being treated what we consider to be unfairly by a parent, a teacher, a spouse, a friend, a public official, or whatever. And one of the things is, of course, we all have the fight and flight syndrome. So we all have emotions. The question is, what do we do with those emotions? Do we nurture them or whatever? So let me, next slide, please. So Nelson Mandela has this quote here: "Resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemy." When we hold these feelings, they tend to hurt us more than others. Next slide. So some of you people are musical lovers. So you've probably heard this one. If we all follow eye for an eye and tooth for tooth, we'll all end up blind and toothless. So that's the earliest quote that I found was 1914 from the Canadian House of Parliament, by the way. Now I have on good authority from President Jay that was actually Abraham Lincoln who came up with that. But in any event, this is a very good quote. Next slide, please. And finally, perhaps I've certainly had experiences in my life, but hopefully you've not had too many, where you have to practice forgiveness. And forgiveness doesn't really excuse or condone what happened. It doesn't change the past, but it does enlarge the future.
Thank you very much, Alan. That was
Thank you, Kathy. There we go, done. It's been a couple of years since I was here. I spoke with you all about the orchestra. Do you remember that talk? All right, cool. I don't have to repeat that, right? So, 30 years, that's really quite something. It's wonderful to celebrate. And we're going to have a really wonderful party over at Uncle Yu's. And, over the years, there's been a lot of amazing things that have happened. And a lot of funny and heartwarming stories. I'll share two real quick with you. So a funny story is early on we were doing a Pops concert in a park, and there was a bandstand, if you will, but there was no covering. So what they did is they got a parachute to hang over the top so that we could be under shade. Well, the wind came up, and the parachute would kind of like go way up, and then it would come way down. And so I was holding up the parachute while I was conducting so the orchestra could see the music.
Wow.
So that was the story.
Yeah.
So a touching story, and this happened also a while ago, but it's really stuck with me. And I heard this from someone else who told me secondhand. Actually, it came third hand, but because one psychologist talked to another, and then eventually told me this story. And apparently there was a patient who was severely depressed for a long time. And her therapist would ask her each week if there was something that made life worth living for her. And so one day she said, well, this last week I was at this concert and it was really beautiful. And that was us. It was really quite something. And it really struck me. I was thrilled, obviously, and also very humbled by it, because music has that incredible power. And then there's a responsibility when you're standing on stage to really give it your best and give it your all for everybody. Whether it's life-gripping or it's to add some beauty and some depth into our lives. So, that stayed with me, and that's really infused me a tremendous amount. Now, I said we're going to have this party, and if you come to the party, and it's going to be at Uncle Yu's, and some of you who've been with Livermore Valley Opera know a few of these names. Baritone Bren Beatty and tenor Christopher Bengoshi have both appeared with Livermore Valley Opera. And Sylvia Jensen sang The Messiah with us last year, as did Christopher. And new to us, who's an incredible singer, especially for this Beethoven Ninth, is Rosalind Jones. Beethoven's Ninth, I talk about the hardness, Beethoven was virtually completely deaf by the time he wrote the Ninth Symphony. And how he was able to do it, obviously, incredible memory, really knew what everything was. But if there was something he needed to check, he had over the years, as his hearing gone down, figured out how to associate different vibrations with different sounds. So he would put a pencil or a bone or something to the keyboard, and he'd bang on it, and he could feel the vibrations and be able to tell if it was what he was looking for. Amazing how he trained himself to do that. So the symphony, the Ninth Symphony, is famous for the Ode to Joy. And it's a journey from start to finish. It's the hero's journey from the inside out. And it comes to the conclusion with the Ode to Joy. And I just want to sort of read to you a couple of lines from the poem, the Schiller poem. Joy's bright spark of divinity, let us sing these cheerful songs. Thy magic power reunites all that custom has divide. You millions, I embrace you. This kiss is for all the world. When you think about Rotary, and you think about the motto, service above self, that's exactly what this poem is saying. Embracing the world. What makes people want to join Rotary, I think, is that sense of community, and the sense of selfishness, the sense of wanting to give and of embracing the world. And in doing so, you become a hero. Because you become a hero without ego to all of those who you serve. And that's the essence of what Rotary is. So I encourage you all to come to the concert, Celebration 2. And what's more, I encourage you to bring anybody who you think could become a Rotarian. Because at the end of the concert, you can turn to them and say, that's what it means to become a Rotarian. So I thank you. Thank you for being able to speak with you again. And it's fun.
To be there.
So during World War II, people of Japanese heritage were labeled as enemy aliens, and approximately 110,000 were removed from their homes on the West Coast. Our speaker today, Yoshiko Kanazawa, was confined in an internment camps, one in Tulare, California, the other in Gila River, Arizona, for almost 3.5 years during World War II. After the war, her family returned to Pasadena, California, where she completed high school. She received her Bachelor of Arts from UCLA and her Master's of Education from the University of Illinois. She was silent about this injustice for most of her life, but she now feels that she must speak up to ensure that our government will never repeat this tragic part of our history. For the past few years, she's been serving as a docent on the Japanese American Museum in San Jose and giving talks at area schools and community organizations like our club. I had the pleasure of working with a group of high school students from Chicago earlier this year, and they were on a study trip. And part of the curriculum was their studies of World War II while they were here. As part of the trip, we visited the Japanese American Museum in San Jose. Yoshiko was giving her presentation to them, and as someone who enjoys history, I was thrilled to be able to sit in on her presentation. I was also pleased to note that the students were absolutely riveted to her presentation. So with no further delay, here's Yoshiko Kanazawa.
I really thank you for this opportunity to share my story with you. And as Yvonne said, I was silent for so long. I used to mention the internment, and people would say, well, yeah, but look what the Japanese did to our soldiers in Japan, and I wouldn't be able to answer. I didn't have an answer. But finally, as I matured, I was able to say, you know, that was the Japanese government, and we here in California had nothing to do with those decisions. But I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about what happened before December 7, and all of you probably know this. But the Japanese military were aggressively attacking countries in Asia because they wanted to build the empire of Japan. They felt that Great Britain had her empire, the French and the Dutch were all over Eastern Asia, and so Japan wanted to make their own niche. They had taken over Manchuria, Korea, had taken over part of China, and were now going into the Philippines and to Indonesia. The United States wanted to stop them by cutting off their oil and metal supply. The Japanese felt that they needed to cripple the U.S. Navy in the Pacific, and they thought the only way they could do that would be with a preemptive strike on Pearl Harbor. So while the diplomats were in Washington, D.C., trying to come to an agreement, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. There are some people, even at the museum in San Jose, who say Roosevelt knew about it. I personally don't believe that, but that'll be a decision you have to make after you study the facts. The politicians and Roosevelt knew that a strike might be coming, but most of the people felt like Japan is such a tiny country, it could fit into just a few states in the United States. And so they didn't think it would really happen. And so there were some generals who were not as prepared as they could have been. The attack was tremendous. 2,400 soldiers died, 68 civilians, over 1,000 soldiers wounded. They got 200 airplanes and 20 naval ships. What saved the United States Navy was that 3 of the aircraft carriers were not sitting in Pearl Harbor that morning. So immediately there was fear and anger and hysteria. This was mostly on the West Coast. It did not affect Japanese Americans who were in the Midwest or back east. But there were so many Japanese on the West Coast that the newspapers and the politicians were all saying, we need to get rid of the Japs. They pressured President Roosevelt to sign this Executive Order 9066 just a few months after Pearl Harbor, which said the government could remove all people, not Japanese, but all people from military areas if they were suspected of being a threat to the security and safety of the United States. It seemed like a constitutional thing that could be done. But when Roosevelt asked the general, and it was General John DeWitt, to see who would need to be moved and from where, then he felt that it was all Japanese. And his feeling was a Jap is a Jap is a Jap. It doesn't matter where they came from, how long they've lived here. They're all Japs. They could all be spies or saboteurs. At that time, there were 3 groupings of people with Japanese heritage. People like my parents who had come to the United States and had lived here for 30, 35 years, were making a nice living and raising their families here, but they could not become citizens. Their children, though, like myself, I'm a Nisei, a second generation, we all became American citizens the minute we were born. There was another group called Kibes, and they were born in America, but they were partially educated in Japan. So about a third of the people living on the West Coast then were the first generation, the Issei's. The rest were American citizens. General DeWitt said all people of Japanese ancestry from Washington, Oregon, California, part of Arizona, and Alaska and Hawaii had to be removed from those militarily sensitive areas. You would think that they would have taken the people in Hawaii first, but the governor of the territory of Hawaii said, if we put all those Japanese into camps, there would not be an economy left in Hawaii. So they were able to just put in people who might be spies. And those were people who might have had business dealings with Japanese companies. They were the Buddhist priests. They were people who may have been teaching martial arts or who were studying Japanese cultural things. And so about 5,000 people from Hawaii were sent to special camps in Hawaii. The government felt that we had to get the Japanese out as quickly as possible. So they decided to do this in 2 steps. The first was to put us in temporary facilities as soon as possible. They could build up tent cities or barrack cities or whatever, but they wanted to get us out quickly. And after that, they would put us in permanent camps. The temporary camps were in towns that we're familiar with: Sacramento, San Francisco, Fresno, Merced, Stockton. And then they put people in a couple of racetracks, Tanforan and Santa Anita. We would be there for about 3 months, and then we would be sent to the camps designated by the red triangles. The furthest east were Roar and Jerome and Arkansas. The government wanted to use those sites because they owned some swampland in Roar and Jerome. My family was in Gila River, Arizona. It was in the middle of a desert. These signs were put up all over the towns where Japanese and Japanese Americans congregated. And it gave directions on what we would have to do, what we could take with us. Basically, it was what we could carry in. They did allow us to take in maybe a couple of large duffel bags, but the rest of our belongings we had to get rid of. Farmers, especially in the Santa Clara Valley where I'm from, were trying to grow strawberries until the very end. They weren't all able to pick the strawberries when they were ripe because they had already been moved, but the white people in the Santa Clara Valley, and I'm sure this happened in other towns, said, we'll take care of this for you. And when we take it to the market and make a profit, we will put it in bank accounts for you. But there were other people who said that and then did not follow through. So there were white people who were trying to help us. And I want to be sure to mention that so you know that. People had to sell their homes or make arrangements to rent them out. They sold their cars and their stores and most of their belongings. My father happened to be a gardener at the time. He had some wealthy customers in Pasadena, and they said we could keep our things in their homes. And so my family didn't have to sell off everything. But you can imagine a family who's going to move in a month had to sell off all their household items. So there was a great loss to those people. Moving day came between March and June of 1942. We had all been given these tags with our numbers on it. Each family had a number. And we always say, well, they weren't tattooed on us. We just had to wear our tag on that day that we were being moved. And my family number was 23237. And it's just a number I remember even now. We were taken by trains and by buses, always under the guard of soldiers. And they didn't tell us where we were going. But there were always guards watching us as we boarded the train. They randomly checked people's suitcases. There were certain things you couldn't take, of course, any weapons or cameras or any machines. When we first got to the camp, we had to have a smallpox and a typhoid fever vaccination. I was 6.5 and I got very sick. We're in this strange place and I know I was just so frightened. These are some of the larger things that the government moved by trucks for us, and they dumped them in a field and people had to find them. This is one of the temporary camps, and they were put up very hastily, so they were just basic. But my family was in a barrack, and we felt grateful for that, because if there weren't enough barracks, people were placed in horse stalls in Santa Anita and in Tampere. And a lot of the people in the Bay Area did go to Tampere. This shows inside the barrack in Salinas. And then from those temporary sites, we were moved to permanent camps. And the government called them relocation centers. Some people were calling them prisons because there was a barbed wire fence around us. We could not leave. But this one is in Utah, and they're all in very desolate places. They were all in very desolate places like this. They grouped about 10 or 12 barracks together to make a block. And in a block, there were about 250 people. We didn't have running water in the barracks, and so we had to share a mess hall. At first, the administrators had cooks there, but slowly they hired the internees, the Japanese Americans, to cook for us in the mess hall. We had all 3 of our meals there. There was a latrine for men and one for women with showers, and then there was a washroom where you could wash clothes. And these are the barracks. The barracks were divided into about 4 or 5 units. They were 120 feet long and 20 feet wide. My family happened to have 7 people, so we got one of the larger rooms. Now, if you were just a couple, you would have to share that barrack room with another family. So there was no privacy in the barracks or in the bathrooms. This is how it looked when we first walked in. All we had there were the beds, and there were blankets on the bed. This cylinder-like thing was going to be a stove. This is my camp in Gila River, Arizona. It was on an Indian reservation. The Indians did not want the government using their land to house people on whom they were inflicting pain. but the government took the land anyway. This is in Manzanar, which is at the foot of Mount Whitney. It's on Highway 395, so you may have seen it. This is in Poston, Arizona, where the guards were still guarding us. Eventually, the government realized that the Japanese were going to be obedient and not try to escape. So they didn't have soldiers marching around like this. But we still had the barbed wire fence in most of the camps. I was in Arizona where it was so desolate. No one was going to be able to escape anyway, so they did take the fence down. This is a guard tower in Manzanar. They had the lights at the top, and if there was a disturbance, they would shine it over the campgrounds. I told you we couldn't take cameras into the camps, but this photographer from Los Angeles, Toyo Miyatake, took his camera and by taking the camera apart and placing parts in different suitcases, then when he got into the camp, he put it together and he took this picture. When the administration found out he was doing that, they didn't stop him. The administrator in Manzanar felt like, well, we should have this for history. In fact, he even asked Ansel Adams to come in and take photos. Ansel was just starting then. This is a barrack room in Heart Mountain, and the people who are the internees could use the wood that was left over from building the barracks, and they could make little tables and chairs. And here's a man watching his children playing. His wife is knitting in the doorway because there was only one light. There was only one light inside the barrack, and she could see much better by just sitting on her porch steps. This is how the shower rooms looked. The shower rooms never had dividers, but the toilet seats were all just lined up, and people complained so much about that they did finally put up barriers between the toilet seats. So those were the conditions. Our parents wanted to make the best of the situation. And these are 3 principles, Japanese principles, that they instilled in us. The first is gaman. Gaman means persevere with patience and with dignity. And the dignity was very important. Gambare means hang in there. And shikata ga nai means it can't be helped, so just make the best of it. And that's how I would say 80% of the people felt. And they were going to do whatever they could to make this place livable for the younger children. So then the government wanted the internees to plant some of their own fruits and vegetables. It was hot in the desert sun, but the men went out there and they worked. They didn't want to just sit around. And anything they could do to improve the quality of our meals or our life, they were willing to do. The government allowed us to raise chickens and hogs, and then people worked in the kitchen. I told you my father was a gardener, but when he went into the camp, he became a cook, and a pretty good one, and he worked in the mess hall. And this is a crew of workers who prepared our 3 meals for us. We got our food cafeteria style and ate at picnic tables like this. Here's some little kids enjoying their huge sausages. Schools were education was very important to the Japanese, as it would be for all of you in the same situation. So they didn't wait for the desks to come, but they just started schools with whatever they had. Here, they still don't have desks, but the teacher is teaching. The internees with a little bit of education were asked to step up to be teachers. So like my cousin was a sophomore at Berkeley, and she became my second grade teacher. Then this is my third grade class. There I am, Yoshiko with the blue arrow, and that is my teacher. She was a Caucasian teacher from the outside, and there were many Caucasians who came to teach. They were paid whatever they would have been paid on the outside. And like in Arizona, we did follow the curriculum that the Arizona public school children followed. This is my fourth grade class, just my eyebrow, my forehead is showing. This teacher had just graduated high school, and he became our teacher in fourth grade. He didn't know anything about teaching, but he made us memorize our times tables and all our math facts. But you know, that was such good training for me that after that I was pretty good in math. Now, here's a Caucasian teacher again, and another one. And by the time 3 years had passed, we had our desks, and we had all the supplies that other children had. The Catholic Church sent priests and nuns, so we could, if you were a Catholic, you could continue to practice your religion. We had Buddhist churches, and we had Christian churches. Now, if you were a Presbyterian minister and you had enough people to start a church, the administration did allow you to use one of the barrack rooms to start your church. So we had our schools, we had our churches. Here's a Obon festival going on. That's a Buddhist festival. Everybody joined in on that. At Christmas, people from all over the United States, probably clubs like yours, sent gifts to the camp so that every child under 15 would have a present on Christmas morning. And we had a hospital, so I always tell people we had Medi-Cal for all because everybody had free care. I had my tonsils taken out in the camp, and my mother had a baby in camp. And the firefighters, a library. We even had a newspaper. They were restricted from printing certain things, but they could talk about, oh, this church is going to have this school will be playing a baseball game, but nothing about political matters, of course. Here are two pictures of me. The one on the left, I'm with my friend whose father planted castor bean trees. And they grew so well in his yard. My dad planted some, but he didn't do it soon enough, so ours didn't grow too big. But I'm on the right with my baby sister who was born in the camp. And this picture shows my husband. Boy, he became my husband later in life. But these men had a band, and they taught him how to play the slide guitar. And so they had entertainment like this. Anybody who had any special skill or talent shared it with the children. And so like my sister took modern dance lessons from a woman who later became part of the Martha Graham dance troupe. So everybody shared what they had. And here are the art classes, baseball games. This is when Eleanor Roosevelt came to our camp in Gila. She was always against Franklin putting us in internment camps. And he, at one point, said, would you go check it out to see what's happening in the camps? I want to be sure that the people are being treated humanely. And so she came. She was very impressed with the way we had built up a community. And I take great pride in that the Japanese people were able to do that. They didn't just sit and grumble, but they made a community. There was trouble in the camps, though, and they came from a questionnaire where they asked two questions. One, would you be willing to serve in the armed forces of the U.S. if wherever ordered? And some people felt like, why should I serve? They've got my family here in prison. They've taken away our freedom. Why should I go and serve? And then the other question was, will you forswear any form of allegiance to the Japanese emperor and swear total allegiance to the United States? They were asking people who could not become citizens of the United States this question. So there was a lot of confusion. Some people left it blank, and some people said no. If you answered no to both those questions, you were placed in a maximum security camp. That was the one in Northeast California, Tule Lake. But then I'm really proud of the 30,000 Japanese Americans who did volunteer or who went when they were drafted. They wanted to prove their loyalty to the United States and show their love for America. My father-in-law at that time was 42 years old, but he said, I want to go and fight, and instead they put him in this military intelligence service because he read Japanese, and they had him translating documents from English to Japanese in Washington, D.C. Here, the 442 soldiers, you probably heard about this group of men who just fought so hard. Their motto was go for broke, and they definitely showed their loyalty. There's my father-in-law. The military intelligence service, some of them, like my father-in-law, translated documents. Others were sent to Japan and to the Philippines. So as soldiers were captured, they interrogated them. The Japanese tended not to surrender. They would rather kill themselves, commit harakiri, instead of giving themselves up to the Americans. So then after the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, then the Japanese emperor said, we are surrendering. Actually, the military wanted to keep on fighting till the last man was standing, but the emperor said, no, there's been enough killing, and we are going to surrender. It was a total surrender. And meanwhile, President Roosevelt had died, and President Truman had taken over, and here he is inspecting the 442, and he said, you fought not only the enemy, but you fought prejudice and have won. Keep up that fight, and we'll continue to win. And so the camps were closed. By the end of 1945, we were each given $25 and a train ticket to wherever we wanted to go in the United States. But when we got back, there was prejudice. I personally rarely felt it, but other people did, and they had these signs up that said, we don't want any Japs back here ever. And I won't go into this because I want to allow you time to ask me questions, but in a civil liberties law of 1988, the Congress passed a law asking telling the president to send each of us internees who were still alive a letter of apology from the United States and a tax-free check for $20,000. So we were given that compensation. By then, the lower courts in San Francisco, the Ninth Circuit Court judge said that it was unconstitutional for the government to just take 110,000 people without trial and place them in a camp for that long. Now, there were people who did leave the camps. Schools in the Midwest recruited kids who were graduating from the high schools in the camps, and they allowed them to come and live on their campus and go to college. When certain towns needed workers, they encouraged families to take those jobs. And so people did start leaving the camps. Or like my husband, his father joined the military intelligence service. So they moved from their camp in Colorado to Chicago. And that's where he grew up for about 2.5 years. Okay. So this is in 2011. Congress gave the gold medal, Congressional Gold Medal, to the whole unit, the 442 and the Military Intelligence Service. And every veteran who was still living or a family member received the medal in bronze. And that's my husband receiving the medal. We were so proud. We went to the Smithsonian and we saw all the presidents lined up, and there was Barack Obama, and then we were able to get this kind of award, and we just felt like, oh, America has made such great progress. We are just doing so well. We need to keep this up. And Eleanor Roosevelt had written this after she visited Gila. She said, we have no common race in this country, but we have an ideal to which all of us are loyal. But we cannot progress if we look down upon any group of people among us because of race or religion. And I just feel like this is a good way to end, because she wrote that in 1943, and it still holds true for us today. So, thank you.
So Yoshiko, we're going to see if there are we have time for a few questions. So Marty?
And when you're in the camp, which language did you speak of when you
Could you repeat the question?
Get lip
I
off.
had always spoken Japanese in my home to my parents, so I could hear.
You can't hear? Can't hear the question.
What was the question was, in the camps, what language did you speak?
Okay. I did speak Japanese to my parents, but we spoke English at school and wherever we were with English-speaking people. But in Tule Lake, the camp where they had the dissidents, the no-no people, in their camp, they were taught Japanese in the morning and they were taught in English in the afternoon. But those were people who had real problems just following along with what the government wanted us to do. Mm-hmm.
Another question? Christian?
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a very powerful presentation.
Thank you.
Let me ask you, how long have you been sharing this story, and what was the motivation? What does it really mean to you?
You know, I wanted to talk about it at some point, and my husband, who was fortunate enough to get his PhD at Illinois, was living a good life. He said, you know, that happened so long ago, let's not talk about it. But at church, we were having a discussion about different journeys that people had taken in life. And the pastor wanted us to talk about this. And so we agreed. And then from there, someone found out that some school was studying it, and we got a little involved. And then after my husband passed away, I wanted something to do in my life. And I thought, this is something I can do. I can contribute in this way.
So what does this story really mean to you?
To me, it means that, first of all, that my parents and all the other adults sacrificed so that we could have a normal life. My father-in-law joined the military because he truly felt if he proves his loyalty, life will be easier for his sons and his grandsons. And it means a lot to me. I feel like as people hear this story, a lot of you didn't learn about this in school, or maybe you had 2 paragraphs in school that told about this. I think it's a story that needs to be told because today we are targeting some immigrant groups and the way we treat black people too. It's not always fair. And these things can happen so easily, where if people don't start standing up for other people, then it could happen to some other group as well. Did I answer
Thank
your
you. Yes,
question?
you did. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Do we have another question? No.
Okay, well, I do just thank you so much. I really appreciate being here.
And before you go, I'd like to offer you a choice of a nice bottle of wine or a bottle of olive oil, whichever you prefer.